Hello again. Just going to run through some of the cutting for this delicious project bag. I'm going to just pop this out of the way now that we know what we're talking about, because it kind of likes to get in the way a little bit. So in your pattern, if you've purchased and downloaded the pattern from GourmetQuilter.com for that project bag, there will be cutting instructions for this bag, and this time I'm not using the printed panel that I've got on the bag here. I'm going to be using just some, actually some fat quarters. I wanted a plainer, I'll just bring it back in a second. I wanted a plainer bag this time, so it's going to have that colour on the front, and on the back I'm going to have a different colour. I just thought that would be kind of fun. I'm using the delicious barley dots, also by Hoffman Fabrics, and that's going to be the front and back. So your pattern's going to tell you all this for your main colours. For the sides of the bag, I've got another colour here, and I've got to cut some strips. We need to have what appears to be fairly narrow strips because we've got to insert the zip in between. So we've got strips for this side and slightly wider strips for this side. So I've cut those of my side fabrics. I've cut some strips ready for the binding. The binding of the bag is another colour. It doesn't have to be, but it is the one I'm making. I've cut my lining squares. They're the same as the outside ones. And again, the strips for the zips are going to be much the same size as the outside ones, but in the lining fabric. I've cut the mesh for the inside lid pocket, and there's a back piece of for the back of the bag. When we've popped the zip in, we've got this segment in the back here, so there's a piece here that will do that of the outside fabric and the lining fabric. I've cut the handles to length. As I mentioned, all of this is listed in your pattern. I've cut just the hook part of the hook and loop fastener that goes inside for the inside pouch thing, page, whatever it is, and then I've got some elastics in there for the base, for that clasp elastic in the base of the bag. So just quickly running through what we need, but you know how to cut fabrics and things, but I did think I'd show you fairly quickly how you might cut some of these slightly harder to handle products. So as we're working on this as being an amazingly special dinner, I'm just moving these out of the way. Sometimes you have to do some special preparation for that special dinner party, and that's what we're doing here. So I'll quickly show you just a little bit of the cutting on this. Is the faster fuse. So this is a fusible product, both sides. It's a stiffening, and I have found that it's really helped give this project bag some body and shape. So really this is fairly straightforward. You may not have a cutting board quite as large as mine, but the chances are if you haven't got one this large, you've got one that's this wide, so you could turn your board around so that you've got the longer length ahead of you. And then I'm going to line that up, so you want to give yourself a nice straight edge to start with. Again, all the instructions are in the pattern, and this is called faster fuse. And we're going to need a couple of pieces for the main lids, and we're going to need some smaller pieces. It's all listed in the pattern. So I would line this up. So I tend to use, when I'm using larger pieces, difficult pieces, I use the markings on my board quite a lot. So I can line this up with a line on the board, and I'm just going to make sure it's all lined up everywhere, and I'm going to just trim off to get a straight edge right along that cutting line there. And I don't need that piece. And what I do need is to cut from here 2 14-inch squares. Well, this faster fuse only comes as wide as this, which isn't enough to get 2 squares out of, so I have to cut 2 14-inch lengths. But in actual fact it's not going to be wasteful, because we need some other 14-inch pieces for the sides of our bag, so they will come out of what's left after we've cut our squares. So I'll just quickly show you. I need to cut 2 of these. I'm just going to do one just so I can show you, and I'm going to turn that around, and again using these markings on the board. This is a 14-inch square I'm cutting, so I've just cut off the 14-inch strip. Now I'm going to cut it along here at 14 inches along, lining everything up with the board. Cut through there. There's my 14-inch square. As well as that, I need some shorter lengths that are going to fit in the sides of the bag. and some of them are only 1 inch wide, but they're 14 inches long. How convenient is that? So I would just continue on with my piece here. Some of them are 2 inches wide, so I could do another one that way. The pattern will tell you how many you need, but I just thought if I showed you that that's nothing to be fearful of cutting. That's just a little bit stiff and ungainly, but quite manageable if you speak nicely to it. And I'll quickly now show you one other thing. We'll have a little look at this. This is tricky stuff sometimes. This is the soft and stable batting. This comes, it's about 60 inches wide, so the length is the shorter distance in this case. And we're wanting to cut some long, narrow strips. The pattern will tell you, and these are for the sides where the zip goes in. So this is a little bit harder to cut because it's a little bit large, a little ungainly. However, we can just pretty much do anything. So I'm going to again use the markings on my board. Now I've got a fold here because I'm wanting the longer length strips. These are narrow strips to go either side of the zipper. So I don't want to cut them off the short width because that's not long enough, and I don't want to join. This is not as easy to join as some other battings can be. So what I'm doing is lining up with my board. I've got that fold along one of the lines on the board, and this isn't cut quite straight as often is the case, so I'm going to use my long ruler. It doesn't have to be as wide as this, although if you've got a wide one that's always a good thing. But I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to use the markings on the board with the markings on the ruler because it's too long for me to be able to get right to the other end of this. I've got this lined up with a mark on the board. I've got the ruler lined up with marks on the board, and I just want to trim off just a small amount there. So I'm going to line that up with the lines on the board, and then I'm just going to trim that off to give me a really good straight edge. Now I've run out of board, as you can see. That's a 24-inch distance. So I have to leave it like that and just carefully reposition it back so that this line runs along one of the lines on the board. Bring it all the way on so that you can get to the other end there, and make sure your edges are staying together, and then I can reposition the ruler. It should sit along there and go straight up, and you can see through the rulers to see your other lines are all lined up, and that's going to give me a straight edge along there. Fortunately I don't need that very last bit because I want just a little bit. So now I need to cut a strip from that is going to be soft and stable. Needs to be a 2-inch wide strip. So what we're going to do is lay the ruler on. There's markings on the rulers, come in 2 inches, keeping this edge together because you've got 2 layers there, nice and straight. So 2 inches in, line up with your ruler. And this time you're not needing to line up with the board so much because you're lining the fabric to the ruler, and then cut along so that you've got a 2-inch wide strip. Same thing, stop, pull it along and realign it with this so that you can get yourself a nice straight line there. Oops. Don't panic a little too much about tiny little feathery bits because they'll all get lost. We are actually, I should mention, we're cutting things slightly larger than we need to because we'll be trimming things back. You also are going to need a 3-inch strip. These are by 47 inches long, so we have plenty of length to not worry too much. Same thing, I'll come along 3 inches in here using my ruler, lining it up with the ruler, moving it down, and then coming along there. So I've cut my strips off ready. They were the sort of the harder bits to cut because now you can pretty much turn it round and cut it from the other direction, which is much easier to handle. You can fold it over. It's a more manageable size. And again, the sizes are listed in the pattern for what we need to cut for the fronts and backs. And there'll be some left because we've got to do some for the inside pocket piece as well. So that was just to give you a little glimpse into how you might handle some of these difficult things for cutting. So next time I'll come back and we'll show you how we're getting started on some of the sewing for this project bag.